Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Epiphany Talks number 22. Can you believe it? 22nd episode हो गई है आज. मुझे खुद भी यकीन नहीं आ रहा था कि एक Epiphany Talks की 22nd episode हम कर रहे हैं आज, और जिसमें से आई थिंक हाफ से ज़्यादा हमने गेमिंग के ऊपर किए. तो आज का जो सेशन है इट्स अ फायरसाइड चैट. मेरे गेस्ट का नाम है जे पावल. और बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग बात यह है कि हम फिर से इंडी गेम डेवलपमेंट के बारे में बात करेंगे. इंडी गेम डेवलपमेंट होता क्या है ये भी हमारे गेस्ट बताएंगे. हम पहले भी एक दफ़ा बाय द वे पूछ चुके हैं. सो जस्ट टू क्रिएट एंगेजमेंट, लिंक्डइन पे, फेसबुक पे, यूट्यूब पे आप लोग कमेंट्स क्यों नहीं डाल देते कि इंडी गेम डेवलपमेंट होता क्या है, राइट बिफोर ही स्टार्ट्स इंट्रोड्यूसिंग इट, राइट. And who is Jay? So obviously Jay will talk about it himself. वो खुद भी हमें बताएंगे क्या करते हैं, what he does. लेकिन very quickly, just to summarize, वो पिछले 20 सालों से पता नहीं कितनी सारी countless, हाँ लिखा हुआ है उनके description में, it says countless, which essentially means कि हम गिनती भी नहीं कर सकते कितनी सारी इन्होंने deals licensing के लिए, development के लिए, distribution के लिए, gaming studios के लिए, game developers के लिए उन्होंने coin की हैं. और 2010 से द पावल ग्रुप इन्होंने स्टार्ट किया, विच मीन्स 10 साल उनको हो गए हैं, जिसके तहत 4000 डेवलपर्स और 750 पब्लिशर्स ग्लोबली उनके साथ जुड़े हुए हैं. So I think this is going to be a really exciting talk. Do post your questions. Please feel free. कोई भी सवाल है आपका, आप ज़रूर comments में डाल दीजिए, and we will definitely try to answer those questions. हम अपनी बेहतरीन कोशिश करेंगे कि तमाम आपके सवालात के हम जवाब ले सकें. ठीक है, so without much ado, I'm just going to have Jay join us. Hi, Jay.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. What time is it for you, Jay?
11 a.m. It's still morning-ish.
It is morning-ish. Well, yeah, it's not too early. I'm feeling kind of disappointed because we've had, I think the earliest that we've had somebody on our show was like 4 a.m. in the morning.
Ooh, yeah, no, we had some of those last week, but no, not this week. I've had plenty of time to get my coffee, and I'm wide awake now.
No, that gives me inner satisfaction. If I wake people up super early, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, okay? But anyway, so for us, it's kind of like it's 8 o'clock in the evening, so it's nighttime. But usually you may have noticed we tend to do our sessions at this point in moment in time because, simply for the time difference and stuff.
Yep.
So anyway, so I briefly oriented the audience in Urdu, who you are, but obviously we want to hear more about you, yourself.
So I'll give you the very short version. I've been in the business side of video games now for 22 years. I started in the late 90s, 23 years. Started in the late 90s, and I was an agent for 7 or 8 years, and then we transitioned that company into a publisher, and then I started a production studio, and I've worked with developers and licenses. So I've had a very unique role in the industry this time because I've literally sat on every side of the table for games and business. And so 10 years ago, we started the Powell Group, which is the consulting firm. As I say, that's my real job, where we get hired by developers and publishers and conferences and tech companies because we track 4,000 developers and another 700 publishers. And so we help them on biz dev and marketing things. But the most rewarding thing has been in the last couple of years where we started the Indie Game Business Initiative. It started as a Twitch show where, we literally just sat down and taught indie devs about the business side of games because no one teaches them. There's, a very, very small, like less than 1% of the colleges and universities out there who have a game program that actually teach anything about business or marketing with it. So we started that as a Twitch show. It has now grown. It's a podcast all its own now. We record it live and stream it just like you are here. We put it on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and LinkedIn. And then in early 2019, we started doing digital events with the indie game business as well. Obviously, I did not have the foresight to see that we were all going to be in a global pandemic this year. But it worked out because I didn't have to figure out how to do these things. We had been doing them for a year already, and so we knew what to expect. And so 2 weeks ago, we had our 6th event, had over 1,000 attendees, 50 some speakers in 29 sessions, I believe. And all of the education aspects of it are completely free. There's no vault to sign up for. And so it's good. That's what I love doing.
Okay, very good. So you know why you're here, right? Because now all of the plans that we've been cooking for the past, let's say 6 months or so, at least for the past 6 months, I've become serious about this, right? Before that, my very good colleague who works for us at Epiphany as the chief strategy officer, he was the in-house gaming expert, and I was just not paying attention to him, okay? Because I'm the person who is really bad at games. And when I say really bad, even with Mario Brothers, I lose. Okay, so that's how bad I am, right? So I was resisting it, but I think now I've come to realize the huge potential that gaming industry presents for anybody. And you've sat all across, the different roles that you've had. So I would like to take a quick moment for our audience, because in Pakistan, gaming industry is still, it's still growing, it's still evolving. It is not the career of choice, let's say, it's not the first career that you think of, or even the, I don't know, 20th career that people think of. How has it been to sit on the different sides of the table, and which role have you enjoyed the most?
Honestly, the indie game business side, I love teaching these developers and getting them on the right path, because I love games. I got into the industry not because I knew the first thing about business, because I didn't. I was an English literature major in college. I had one business course, and I think I got a D in it, so I barely passed it anyway. And I learned the business aspect, as over the last 20-some years. Going out and helping teams, in our consulting role, I still enjoy it. I still love doing that. But the sharing the knowledge that a lot of us have had for doing this for 10, 20 years, it's truly my favorite thing that I've done in decades.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Okay, and you're in English. You used to be an English major, English lit major.
Yes.
And then how did the transition happen? Can we talk a little bit about that?
I needed beer money in college, basically.
Okay.
So I was in school, and I was a resident assistant. And in the US, that means you're basically in charge of a hall in the dorm, and they give you free room and board. So it's great for your parents, but they don't pay you anything. So it's not that great for you. And I answered an ad in the school paper, and it was a small group locally, and it was two guys actually. And they said, we need somebody to come in and play games and give us our opinion, just like review them. And I'm like, oh, I can do this. I've been doing this since I was like 5. I can absolutely do this. And that's how I got started. I would come in, and I literally got started as a tester, back in the late 90s. And when I graduated, they eventually, the intern that was over that program graduated and left. And so they put me in charge of that program. And then when I graduated, they offered me a job, and I ended up staying there for 10 years. So there was no planning to it. And, just like in Pakistan, it was not the career I thought I was going to do. And everyone in my family told me not to do it because there was no money in it, and it was just video games.
How do they feel about it now, by the way?
I still don't think they fully understand what I do, but yeah, it is different now, because I've been very successful at it. This is the second company I've started, and we've been doing this company I've been running this company for 10 years. So and I'm not joking. I really don't think they understand what I do, but the fact that I've been doing it for as long as I have, and I've had the success, now it's accepted.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And the reason why I'm asking all of these questions, because a lot of times, so a lot of the community that we end up working with are young, aspiring entrepreneurs or else existing entrepreneurs. In Pakistan, it is growing. There is government intervention, and a lot of other sort of support is coming in to support people who are trying to pursue business. But still, parents are like, okay, because for a very, very long time, higher education has all been about, okay, you get educated to get a job. So economic stability immediately after you after you graduate. And I'm going to say get married, because immediately after people graduate, that's the first thing they're thinking. So again, there is economic pressure on them, right? But sometimes it's post fact. So usually people will start respecting you once you've become successful. So that's the advice that we give to the entrepreneurs. For 3-4 years, or maybe even 5 years, just put the blinkers on, stop listening, stop paying attention to anything that's going on, just do your work. And once you're successful, people will be like, oh yeah, they'll be so proud of the same people will be so proud of you. It's so funny.
It is. So anyway, it's just one of those things that people don't think of. And that's why we always ask, folks, when we're doing interviews, it's like, how did you get into the industry? Because there's no one path. It's like, we all got in by doing something else.
Okay. All right. So tell me a little bit more. Okay. So tell me, what is indie game business? So what do we mean by that?
So it was, I'm not the best at naming companies. I mean, obviously my consulting firm is called the Powell Group. It's not, I don't go out on too many limbs. Indie game business, because that's what we focus on, the business of indie games. And because when we started it, that Twitch URL was available and no one else had it. And so it worked out really well. But that's because, we don't focus on the design side of it, the technical side of it, the art, anything like that. We are all about teaching developers about business. And so I realized this. I had been in the industry 10 years and I was given a lecture out in LA on how to find a publisher. And I said, you have to make sure when you're picking that final choice that you qualify that publisher and you do your research. And then I went on to the next slide and somebody raised their hand. They're like, what do you mean? And it was like, I didn't understand why they didn't understand it. And I went, oh my God, there's knowledge that we have that we assume everybody has, and they don't. And, they're no way of learning how to do this stuff. And so we called it that, and it's basically how it's grown. It's still at its heart, it's a education initiative. It's not something that we do to get paid on, because I assure you it doesn't generate positive revenue, but it's something that we're passionate about.
Yeah. This is just the conversation that we were having, that a lot of the stuff that we do, it's out of the passion for sharing knowledge or for the love of it. And it may never make money. And I think it's just about accepting it. Okay, it's never going to make money. You have to make money some other way. Right? So, okay, you work 3 jobs maybe to do the real work that you love, right? But okay,
exactly.
Tell me something. Tell me about how, what are some of the major challenges that are faced by indie game developers, and how does your company help solve them? So of course, business skills is one side of it, but when we talk about licensing or whatever else, you answer the question. Yeah.
It's really, I mean, it's a combination of all of it. I mean, in 20 some years, the same trends still happen. Developers don't realize that they need to be marketing their game early, and then furthermore, they don't know how to market it. And so I still get these phone calls from developers, and they say, okay, our game is launching next month and we haven't done any marketing and we don't have any budget for it. What can we do? And I'm, pick a god and start praying. That's it. That's the only thing I can tell you, because you're not going to be able to do that. So they need to be discovered. So discoverability is still a big issue. But to do that, you need to be marketing. Or if you are going to go the publisher route, you need to be going out and finding a publisher. And so the other big, hiccup that we see with a lot of developers is they don't realize how many publishers are out there and how much opportunity they have. So, I mean, like I said, we track 700 around the world across PC and console and mobile. And so I'll talk to a developer and they'll say, well, we've already shopped it to like everybody. I'm like, okay, how many people did you shop it to? Like 25. So I'm like, okay, well, you only missed about 200 of them. So you're good. Don't worry about it.
And that's the thing. Of that, right?
Yeah.
You've reached 1/8 of that.
They don't realize how much opportunity is out there. So it's funny. I mean, the industry hasn't changed. It's gotten much bigger, but it's still the same issues. They need to have money to make their game. They need to be marketing it, and they need to be able to find a way to take it to the stores, take it to market themselves. And so how do we help them? We teach them how to do that. On the consulting side, they can hire us and we do that for them. But on the indie game business side, we literally sit down and teach them how to do it, because I don't want to be that consulting firm that says, hey, we know you need our help, but you can't afford it. So too bad. We always want to be able to give them a route to get it done.
So what are some of the favorite games that you may have helped launch or market?
So if you remember the Jerry Maguire movie years ago with Tom Cruise, and it starts out and he says, I'm that shoulder that you see in the side of the picture. That's me. That's, so I did some of the very first deals in the US for Paradox, like the original Europa Universalis and Hearts of Iron and Crusader Kings. I worked with DICE before they went to EA. We did the distribution for Codename Eagle, which was the predecessor to Battlefield 1942. I worked with Starbreeze, long before they started doing Payday. We did a game called Enclave with them. There's a lot of studios, that I can still, with a lot of pride, say, I did their first deal. They've gotten bigger and they didn't, they moved on and they've done fantastic on their own to still be around for 20 some years. But there's a lot of studios. I get that question a lot, especially like when I'm talking to a school and they're like, so what games have you worked on that we know of? And I'm like, none. You are not going to recognize any of the hundreds of games that I've been a part of. But it's satisfying because I get to look and I see, People Can Fly that's been working with Epic for years, and we did their first deal. And so it's a lot of stuff like that.
And how would you say, indie game development has grown over the years from the time that you started to where you are now?
It's more opportunity. I mean, we still have indie games. We had indie games, 20 years ago. But now, especially in the last 10 years, with the growth of digital distribution, both through iOS and through Steam and everything that spawned, the developers have an easier way to get to market. There's actually like that glimmer of hope. When I first started in the industry, you could spend 2 years working on a project, but if you didn't get a publishing deal at the end of it, then you were dead in the water. There was no way to get your game out because you had to have a publisher, because they were the ones that had the relationships with the distribution companies that could get the game into Walmart and Best Buy and Virgin and all these stores around the world. But now that's not the case. You can absolutely go out, and if everything else fails, you still got a good chance of launching your game, in some way, shape, or another. Whether or not it's going to be successful is a different thing, but you can bring it to market. And so, having that option and having, that opportunity has really opened up this side of the industry, and we're all better for it.
It's like an equalizer, right? So now every sort of person can actually participate. So everybody who's saying hi, I'm just going to take a quick second to say, look, you guys, if you have any questions, any comments, please ask. So Crying Psycho, I hope you're not crying right now, but hello. Welcome. Somebody is welcoming you. Somebody from Pakistan, Abdul Basit, he says welcome. So
thank you, bud.
Yes. All right. Okay. So tell me something else, right? So tell us about, we obviously, everybody understands that the overall gaming industry is worth 152 billion USD. How much of that I know that there aren't, clear figures, but still, by your reckoning, how much of that can be attributed to indie games?
So this is actually the $1 billion question. It depends on how you want to identify an indie game. And this is the argument that's always happening. It's XYZ isn't an indie game. Internally, we call an indie game anything that's developed by the developer without publisher assistance. That's an indie game. But technically, by that definition, you could call Fortnite an indie game, because when they started developing it, it was a small team inside at least the Battle Royale stage. It was a very small part of the bigger Fortnite team. But if we look at, what's commonly referred to as the indie industry, you're probably looking at 1 to 2 billion. It's a small part. It's a lot more companies and a lot more games, but they're not bringing in the revenue that the ones, the Activision titles are in the EA games. So I would guess 1 to 2 billion. And then, and if you got really crazy with your definition, it could go up. But yeah, it's a small part.
But do you think that indie has so would you say that indie games actually have more potential then to grow and, increase in terms of economic value as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time that we see something like Fortnite or Stardew Valley, and I'll give you a prime example, Animal Crossing. So Animal Crossing came out, the one for the Switch came out, right as the pandemic hit. I think the last trip I made to a Walmart before the pandemic hit was to buy Animal Crossing. that created a huge demand for, this style of games. And so as people phased out of it and they did everything they wanted to do, they're looking around and they're going, okay, so now what? And that's when, a lot of them jumped directly to Stardew Valley, which is obviously a multi-million-dollar hit in and of itself. But things like that bring in an audience that hasn't been in the game space that much before, and that therefore there's other games that are out there that they start looking at and they start playing, and it increases. It's so it absolutely does. And the thing is, without the indie games, you're not going to have a lot of the AAA games. I mean, literally, the whole battle royale genre came out of a mod in another game. I mean, it was an indie team that built it. And so there is always a lot of opportunity there. It's a matter of helping the teams get to where people know they're there.
So, so while we're on this topic, right, and somebody actually has put in a comment, which is exactly what you're saying, right? So it is by far the best indie scene right now. The fact that all of these AAA companies that have opened up and allow indie companies to publish games on their platforms really makes a difference, right?
Yep.
And
it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just talking about it, right? That before the pandemic hit, and then of course during the pandemic, what are people doing? Either they're doing webinars like us, or else they're watching Netflix and playing games, right? That's what we're doing. My daughter is playing Roblox with her friends nonstop. Oh my God. Well, and then we fight with the internet as well, right?
The statistic about a month ago, it's like half of the kids in the US under the age of 16 are playing Roblox. And that's I have an 8-year-old, he's playing it. And so all of this is introducing people to a genre that, it's not the people that already knew games existed that are the important ones. It's the ones that always dismissed video games as just video games. It's like, no, now they're seeing there's a lot more to it. And we're not just all running around shooting zombies.
You know what? You know what the funny part is? One could argue that, okay, now that there are easier games as well on Roblox, I would actually improve my game playing skills. Not happening. My daughter makes so much fun of me because of all these orbs. Are they called orbs? The little jumping that you have to do, right? And I keep stepping and I keep falling. Oh my God! The tower. What is it? Towers of Hell or whatever the game is. Okay, I hate it. I hate it because I can never complete it. But anyway, so sorry.
Those are hard on Roblox. I'm not going to lie. Those are not easy to do sometimes. So you're not alone.
Yeah, well, it's not just the children who are playing it, right? It's also their parents who are playing it just to understand, because I find that I need to learn more so I can communicate with her at a whole new level, right? I mean, this is what she's interested in, so I better get interested in that, and see what she's doing and staying safe. All of that whole other scene as well, which is very important. We actually had an incident in the middle in Pakistan where PUBG was banned for some time. So I just want to kind of like hear your thoughts, because you do have an 8-year-old. I know that a lot of people around my age, these are real concerns where they're concerned that, okay, their kids are just sitting, doing a lot of digital screen time. What do you think? How do you think people can take care and manage that?
This is the argument that I get in with all of the other parents at my son's school. It's not the screen time. Because, I mean, face it, like right now, for the last 8 months, we've had nothing but screen time. And if you wanted to be social outside of your family, it was screen time. It's not the screen time. It's what they're doing and what they're watching on the screen that makes a difference. If you ask a parent 10 years ago, would they let their kid play a video game like Minecraft for 10 hours? And they'd be like, well, no, that's crazy. Why would you do that? It's like, well, would you let them sit down and watch Sesame Street or something like that for 10 hours? Like, well, 10 hours may be long, but yeah, it was more accepting. But, it's constantly on the parents you have to monitor and you have to understand, what your kid is doing. But I don't think there's a better example than what we've gone through in 2020. And it's like my son, he doesn't play games all day, but he's sitting on there. He's getting a lot of social activity with his friends through Fortnite, a lot with Minecraft, a lot with Roblox. He plays various different things, and they don't do the things we expect them to do, because I'll get on and play Fortnite with him every now and then. And he's like, no, Dad, we're having a fashion show. I'm like, we're having a what? He's like, yeah, come over to creative mode and somebody picks a theme and then you have to go through all of your outfits and emotes and the person with the best theme wins. And I'm like, are you serious? And I go to their little island and they have literally built a stage there to do this on. So, you can't, and it's hard to teach parents who have always been like, no, video games are bad. But the creative mode of things like Fortnite and Minecraft and Roblox it's really a good tool. And that's the reason that our kids haven't gone absolutely crazy in the last 9 months. It's like they can still see their friends and they can hang out with their friends, even if they're not face to face.
Agreed. And we also see a lot more gamification happening, right? In the education sector, for instance. And indie game developers are actually playing. Well, you're laughing. Okay, tell me why.
Because the education industry, they don't get it. And so it's very timely because we're helping a new studio go through and bring something to market that's going to be, in my opinion anyway, good, because of course we're working with it. But I watch them play these games and I'm like, oh my God, that game is horrible, but it's teaching math or whatever, but it's not engaging. And so whenever we're talking to companies who are doing education in the industry, and I'm like, you have to realize that your competition isn't that other education app that you're looking at. Your competition is Fortnite.
Yeah.
And if your game is not engaging and kids don't enjoy it, they're going to play it for the minimum amount of time their parents or teachers mandate they play it, and then they're going to go play something else. Yeah. You have to have that gameplay first and make that engaging, and then sneak the education stuff in on it. And a lot of these, studios from outside of our industry, they're like, okay, we're going to gamify it. We're going to put badges in it. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is not going to work. So it is, we are seeing more of it, but the beauty of it is the more gaming becomes a part of, everybody's life, the more these companies look around and go, okay, we're not doing enough in this area, and so it is good, but they still have a long way to go.
They're approaching it from a different side, right? Not really understanding the users. And that's true for entrepreneurship as well, right? So you have to be as close to your customers as possible. In this case, children who need to learn math. If you don't understand what they're doing in their free time and what they like, then you won't be able to. So I completely agree with you. It goes back to, KYC, know your customer. It sounds very nice, but how many people actually know their customer, right? They don't.
Kids' titles are even... they're even harder because you have to engage that child, but you have to convince their parent. And so with most games, the person that you're engaging and convincing to buy is the same person. I'm on Steam. I see a game. I like it. I play it because I buy it because I want to play it. Kids stuff and education is completely different. And that's why you see so many licenses in it, with Sesame Street and Garfield and Disney and Nickelodeon and everything else. It's because they know the kids are going to be playing the game, but their customer's the parent. And that's why a lot of times they attack it from the education side first, because they know that's what the parent wants to see.
Yeah, true. But tell me something else, right? So let's talk about, new indie game developers who are trying to enter into this industry. What sort of advice would you have for them? What should they watch out for? How should they prep? What should they be thinking about when they're entering into the industry for the first time?
You have to start building a community day one, and that goes hand in hand with your marketing. So one of the first things that we tell developers is like, the minute you have something that you can share on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, start there. And they're like, well, nobody's following me. And I'm like, nobody was following me 2.5 years ago when we started our Twitch channel. But now we have almost 1,800 industry professionals on it. You have to start somewhere. So one, they need to start build their community day one. because now that has become a big part of what the publishers ask for. 4 or 5 years ago, if we sent a title to a publisher and the developer already had an early access version on Steam, the publisher's like, nope, don't want it. They've already launched it. Our marketing window is shot. Now we send them these games and they're like, how many wish lists do they have? How many Twitter followers? How big is their Discord server? You have to start doing that day one. It's going to benefit you either with a publisher or without, but you have to start it. You have to start marketing as soon as possible, and the other side of it, if this is truly your first game, you need a publisher, and you need it maybe not for the funding side of it or even for the distribution side of it. You need it so you understand all the elements that go into a successful game launch. So everything from marketing to localization to testing, all of these things that are not top of mind, the developers are like, okay, we've got our game and we're ready to go. And there's other steps in there. So on the publisher side, it's simply knowing how many publishers and understanding your true depth of options out there.
So if I was to ask you, right, because this is obviously, we're talking about individual game developers or maybe, two people doing it together. It sounds like an awful amount of work for one person or two people to do. So what would you advise? So if suppose somebody wanted to do this and wanted to constitute the team, what would that entail, right? Or would they have to do everything on their own? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm biased, but I would say hire a consultant that's been doing this for 20 years. But it is a lot of work, and they don't realize it. And this is where a lot of companies get in trouble because they don't plan for it. But I mean, there are things that you can do that don't cost as much as hiring a consultant. You need a community manager, and someone who's handling social media to help you with that community side and the marketing side. And you are going to have to take time out of your day, out of your week to, look into all of these aspects of bringing a game to market that you may not like doing and that you may not be good at first. But there's a lot of resources out there, that can show you how to do it and teach you how to do it. And I mean, these digital events have been fantastic for indie devs, whether they realize it or not. When it first hit in March or April, one of the big sites had an article and they said, the cancellation of PAX and GDC is like a death knell to indie developers. And I wrote an article back. And I was like, no, you're crazy. This is an absolute opportunity. We sat down in April and looked at all the digital conferences that were planned June, July, August. And there was about one a week, and it's like you could literally attend every single one of them for less than it would take you to go to GDC, and so there are things out there, but you have to realize business and marketing is important, and you have to make time for it or find people to, do it for you or help you do it to save time.
Okay, so we've got a lot of comments coming in from Uplitus Games. Do you know this person?
Yes, they're on our Discord.
Oh, okay. So so they used to do, I think what you're talking about, the stage and the fashion show. So that, and then he or she is talking about math Pluster as a kid and how it helped math skills.
That was, right? And I played that, and now I don't know how old Uplitus is, but I played Number Crunchers and the original Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. So yeah, a lot of that stuff. That's how we enjoyed learning in school.
And then 16 hours a day just to keep the ball rolling while working while watching this. And then IGB was the best thing that happened to Uplitus Games. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Okay, so this is all fantastic stuff, right? And it sounds like obviously all of this learning and knowledge exchange is really, really important. By the way, off topic, but how I learned how to type? Because computers, first we had those monitors and those desks, the desktops. They came when I was a kid, right?
Was it called?
I want to say early teens, I think. But anyway, so how I learned typing? I don't remember the name of the game, but there were these little frogs and there were all these bubbles that you had to pop and you had to type the letters inside the. So that was
No,
really interesting, right?
I didn't see, we had something called paws, like cat
Okay.
paws, and you had
Oh,
to
okay.
type to keep
Uh,
up with them as they walked across the screen. So
hmm,
yeah, I mean that's
hmm,
it.
hmm.
I am old enough that I actually took a typing class in high school that was on an honest to God typewriter. They weren't on computers. We actually
Yeah.
learned with typewriters. And so, but
Yeah.
I've been using computers
Okay.
for years.
Well, we've established you're older than me. Way, way, way older.
I'm older than a lot of people in this industry.
Right. So now my next question is going to be about women in this field, right?
Yes.
So are there a lot of women in indie games? Are there a lot of women indie game developers? And
Yes.
if okay, all right. And what sort of advice do you think? Is there any special advice for women entering into this field? Do you
It's,
face it? Do you feel that there are any barriers faced by women when they're trying to enter into game
oh my
development?
God, yes. I mean, still to this day, I
Hmm,
mean, it's one, the industry has always been very male centric, and we have people, on our show and in our events all the time, and women
hmm,
telling the same story over and over. It's,
hmm,
they're at a conference, they're
hmm,
demoing this game, and
hmm,
somebody comes by and goes, I want to meet the developer. And she's like, I'm the developer. And they're like, no, 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 the
hmm,
real developer. And it is still,
hmm,
this mentality that
hmm,
games are only for boys 14 to 24,
hmm,
that is still permeated. We still see
hmm,
it. The Me Too movement, is, for those of us who have been doing it, I won't say it's eye-opening because we know it happens,
hmm,
but it's bringing the realization to a whole lot of new people that this
hmm,
is a very big deal. And it's still, we
hmm,
need to get to the point where it's 50-50. I mean, the
hmm,
world is 50-50, and arguably more women play games than men. So why
hmm,
is this an issue? But it's still very much systemic, and a systemic issue is going to be deeper at a big publisher like we've seen Ubisoft going through recently. Indie
hmm,
games are, we know a lot of studios who are run by women, people of color, folks that are not your standard, I'm a white male and this is my video game.
hmm,
It's becoming more and more prevalent, and the indie scene is where it all starts. But
hmm,
it's still a very tough space and a very unfair space to a lot of women in the industry. And
hmm.
it is changing, but it's not changing fast enough.
What advice would you give to the women, right, on one side, and what advice would you give to the men actually? How can they actually make it more facilitative for women to enter, right? All the advice comes for the women, okay? So
Can
yes, we'll
can I
hear the advice.
curse on this show? Can I say what I'm actually thinking? The
Well,
men need
preferably not. Who knows who's watching, right? Well, go ahead. Yeah, tell
the
me what
men
you're
need
thinking.
to just, in many cases, just shut up,
Hmm,
and listen to somebody, else's opinion, and don't just assume that women are on your team to make your game more casual, because we see that a lot, and that's
hmm,
this mentality. But to the women, it's like, yeah, there's advice, but it's like I've never been in that role, so I don't want to sit there and say, oh well,
hmm,
be tough and stand up for yourself, because it's not always that easy. You know,
hmm,
the best advice I can give, and this, through stuff that I've experienced in my own personal life, is talk to someone, because no matter what you are going through and how bad it is or how bad that you feel it is,
hmm,
unless you have absolutely started growing a tail and been picked up by aliens, somebody else in this industry has gone through it as well. And there are a lot of very safe spaces. I'm an ambassador for the Women in Games, initiative, and they're big on
hmm,
Facebook. There are IGDA groups, but you have to talk to people. You have to understand that
hmm,
there are folks who can help, and there
hmm,
are resources out there. But I don't
hmm,
want to, as a 40-some-year-old white guy, I don't want to sit here and go, well, you need to do this, because
hmm, hmm.
it's like, what?
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
never had,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. But listening. So really honestly, what does work is listening to understand what the problem is, at what levels they're experiencing the problems. And then next time when you are sitting in a meeting, talk about it, right? So instead of the women always championing their own cause, it has to be sometimes the white man saying yes, support them, or whether it's minorities, whether it's women, whether whoever it may be. Look, so there's a question that's come in. Okay, so we're going to take that question. I think I can do my team's first game without a publisher. How wrong could I be? We have already started building a community. So we answered this question earlier, but please answer it again, because I think he needs your help.
If you have never launched a game on your own before, get a publisher the first time, because it's, getting that game to 90% done is the easy part. That last 10% is the part that's the most important and is the hardest. And you in many cases don't know what you don't know. Can an indie team self-publish? Yeah, absolutely, you can. But you need to have some sort of knowledge into how you go out there and do influencer marketing and make sure your game is being tested. All of the little stuff that goes in. And we actually had a episode of the podcast with Junie, who is one of the producers over at Sodesco. And the whole talk was, here are the things that publishers do that you don't realize that they do. And that's the thing. It's not that you can't. Anyone who has $100 and a Steam account can launch a game, but to be successful and to put yourself in the best position to succeed on that first game, yeah, you do need a publisher.
Yes, Sobletus Games, I completely agree with you. I think I'm falling in love with you.
Don't do that. It's dangerous. It's like
okay, moving forward. Tell me something else, right? So, how would you compare indie games versus AAA counterparts?
Indie games are more original. They take more chances. AAA games, for the most part, and there are circumstances where it's not true, but for the most part, they're pretty much set to a script, because that's how publishers know they're going to be safe. They look and they say, okay, well, this genre, they do P&L statements, profit and loss. And it used to be a lot easier when we could get NPD data than it is now with mobile stores. It's really expensive to get this information. But, you sit down, and this is what we did when I was a publisher. You sit down and you say, okay, here's this game. Here are 3 games that are similar to it that have been on the market. This is what they sold. And so we can make some correlations between scope and features and quality and all that sort of stuff, and we can estimate the number of sales. The only way a AAA publisher can do that is with the sales of their own games or other AAA games. It's like Activision, for example, they don't want to look at anything that's not going to sell 10 million units. An indie team sells 10 million units and they can retire if they want to. It's a big difference. But all of the innovation that we see in the industry, all of the new stuff comes from indie teams. That's the reality of it.
What are some of we talked about Fortnite, but what are some 3 best examples that started as indie, but now they're multi-million studios?
Minecraft, that was multi-billion now.
No, multi-million. Well, now, yes, but even if we're talking about multi-million.
Stardew Valley, and that one is really one that's completely a unicorn. Not only was it an indie game, it was completely developed by one guy. He did the art, the music. Eric did all of it, and then launched it. And now he has a team, and now he has, multiple publishers that are handling things like that. But yeah, Minecraft is the one that people don't think back, don't remember. Yeah, it started as a Java game. There are things like PUBG. PUBG came from the work that Brennan was doing on, I think, Rust. I can't remember exactly, but something like that. But there are big ones out there. The interesting thing is they're usually found in genres that publishers have completely written off. Nobody was going to do a life simulator, because it's like, what would you compare Stardew to? It's like Harvest Moon. Harvest Moon was successful, but it was a very niche game. And so now there's more distribution options and you're not competing with literal shelf space, there's a lot of genres that are coming back. The entire space combat genre. I'm not going to sit here and say that Star Citizen is an indie game, but they would not have remotely raised that amount of money from a publisher to do a space combat game when they got started, and a lot of the other games that go along with it. So publishers tend to play it safe, because at the end of the day, they have to report to shareholders, and indie teams don't. They just need to make money. And
absolutely, and they're in it for. So look, my next question is going to be a bit about, So in a way, it's almost like, okay, this is the aspiration, right? That you eventually become big enough, and you're so successful that you've actually joined the AAA crowd, right? But in a way, you're actually losing some of your essence, right? Maybe that's a paradox. What would you say to that?
Because it's one of the cycles that we see, and so a lot of times people say, "So what's changed in the industry in 20 years?" And I was like, "Well, a lot's changed, but at the same time, we keep going through cycles. Retail versus digital is one. Everything was digital. I mean, retail, and then digital came along. Retail died out, and now, like in the last 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of companies that are going back to retail because there's a vacuum there. I completely lost my train of thought there. What was the original question? Because I get derailed.
My question was that, in a way, don't you feel that the indie game developers are actually going to lose their essence by the time they become AAA games? Because then there are restrictions and there are certain things that they're not going to do anymore or experiment that way anymore.
They do, but what we see is they work at a AAA studio for several years or ship a product or two, and then they go, "Oh my God, I miss being an indie dev." And they leave and they go back to indie development. And then they do that for 4 or 5 years and they go back to AAA. The big difference is when you're working as an indie studio, and it's like any small business, you see everything. You aren't sitting there doing one thing every single day. When you get to a bigger AAA studio, every task is very specialized. And so you're only doing animation of sword enchantments, for a year. And so you get to where you need a little more variety, and that's what happens. People, we've seen it for 20 years. They start out as a small studio, or the studio grows, and they become a AAA studio, and then the people that have been there the longest go, "I miss being an indie dev," and they go back and they start the cycle all over again.
So, she's also saying the same thing, right? How it's not fun to work on the same thing over and over again, right? I think I would go mad if I had to work on one swish.
But it is good to get a steady paycheck, and that's what usually drives it. Because the indies, you're never guaranteed a paycheck in the indie development.
Absolutely, yes. It's so interesting how so much of what you're saying is so true, and it can just simply be mapped over onto entrepreneurship generally.
Oh, yeah,
so you can have a lot of fun doing what you like to do and you're passionate about it, but you never know whether the next contract will come through or not, or when the next paycheck will come, right? In Pakistan, at least, there's a big, huge delay in payments. Very bad. Okay, so this is something that Alex is saying. He's very excited.
Oh yeah, Indie Game Lover she's actually on our Discord. I mean, and we work very closely with them on the indie dev world order and the Pitch Your Game initiative too. So that's one thing. So Liam Trost started, years ago. He did like 30-day game dev, and in the last year, he started a thing on Twitter. So it's hashtag Pitch Your Game, Pitch YA Game. And we just had one Tuesday, and we work closely with them. And we've sponsored them in the past, but it's one day where indie devs go on and they pitch their entire game in a tweet. So it's not only good for visibility, but it's a fantastic exercise because it gets, it's been trending in the UK at some of these events. The publishers are watching, I'm sitting there watching. And so not only is it a chance for visibility, but it's a chance to actually get noticed and get feedback and all this stuff too. So yeah, Indie Game Lover, she's awesome. I mean, absolutely support her on Patreon and Coffee and all these places that she goes, because she is one of the unsung heroes of the industry.
Okay, so we have to have her on our show. So after the show, I'm going to ask you to do the connect.
I'll try to work on that. She's not big into the speaking aspects, but she's awesome. I'll tell you that.
Well, we can work offline as well. We need to do so much stuff, right? We've got a role for everyone. Okay, so tell me something about how much raw talent do you think can play into this industry versus getting a professional degree and trying to, well, they're limited professional degree options anyway, but still. right? What do you think?
It's one that I always have to preface when I go speak at a high school or a university, and I tell the teacher, don't expect me to be the one that walks in the door and tells these kids to go get a degree if they want to be in games, because they don't have to. It's there are a lot of companies, and I say companies. There's universities, and then there's companies that are convincing kids to come in and pay tens of thousands of dollars so they can get a game design degree. Most of them, that degree is not worth the piece of paper that it's printed on, because in this industry, it's raw talent is one thing, but it's more about your portfolio, your art portfolio, the coding that you've done. Have you shipped a game? That's why we tell indie devs, I don't care if that was a game that you spent 3 weeks on in Twine and you released it to Itch.io. You released a game, and that's the important part. And so this industry is still very much, when we're hiring, we want to know what you've done, not what you've studied. And obviously what you've studied is important. But if you see two people come in for the same job, and one of them has been making games for 4 years and one of them has been studying to make games for 4 years,
who would you pick? It's a
take the person that's been making them for 4 years. And so the university system and the education system is coming around, and obviously if you don't know how to code, you need to go get a degree. But there's so many jobs in this industry. I mean, look at me, I can't code. I haven't coded since basic back in high school. That was the last coding I did. I can't draw, but there's so many opportunities for people in games. We're actually we're having our local IGDA meeting tonight, and that is what we're talking about. It's all the different opportunities if you love video games, but it's not something that you have to have a degree to do. It's something that you have to have the experience doing.
Okay, so a couple, probably we're reaching the end of the thing, but I needed to ask you about for newcomers, right? So where can newcomers publish their indie games? That's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you.
So, I mean, you can publish it on Steam. There's you have to have $100, I think, to publish it on Steam. That's not necessarily the best place to publish it. There's Itch.io. Like I said, there's a lot of sites that are, very much based on smaller games. Itch.io is the one that I think most people go to first, but there's a lot of it. If you have a Macintosh, you can launch a game on iOS. And that doesn't mean somebody's going to see it, but it does mean that you can launch it. So it's a lot easier these days to do it. You can launch something on Google Play. You can launch something on Steam. If you have an Xbox, you can technically launch something on Microsoft Store. They're going to have to approve it, but there are a lot more places to go now. I think Itch.io is probably the easiest one for everybody to get on.
Okay. And tell me something. So something that you were talking about right now, right? Start making the game, and then you'll experience it and you will learn anyway, rather than just studying it. So in that case, what do you think? Do you think, if we could just discuss what are the advantages of starting a career as an indie game developer versus, trying to join in a more formal setting? What do you think should be the preferred route?
I don't think there is a preferred route. I think it really comes down to what you want to do and how you want to go about doing it. Like I said, when we interview people, that's the first question. I want to know, how did you get in the industry? Because it's very nonlinear. But if you want to see all the aspects of game development and publishing, that's where you need to be an indie dev. But if you want to get in and see how, get more structure, learn a lot of the tool sets and what these big companies do, then you need to go to a AAA studio. And you can argue that either one is easier. It's like, there's more job opportunities at a AAA publisher, but it's easier to just start doing it on your own as an indie dev. But you really need to decide. I mean, and it's a lot like entrepreneurship. I have friends of mine that I went to college with who look at me, and this is the second company that I've started and bootstrapped. And they're like, there's no way I could do what you do. I mean, that's just crazy. And I'm like, you are way smarter than I am. I mean, we actually have the numbers to prove that you're smarter than I am, but it's a risk thing. And that's what it is. You have to go into indie dev knowing that you're not going to get a steady paycheck. You know, it's not like, you know, a real job. And so it really depends. I don't think it just depends on the person. I don't think there's a best way, you know, either way.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to let you tell us something which you think I should have asked and maybe I've forgotten to ask because you're the expert.
Oh, that's a good one. My favorite, I mean, I am biased. I mean, it comes to the business side. And so the thing that I always try to emphasize is you have to understand this part of the industry. You don't have to have a Harvard law degree. You don't have to, you know, understand macro and micro economics. I mean, I could argue that I don't still understand all of that to this day, but you do have to understand the business side of the games. And what we tell developers is if you want to make games for art and as a hobby, then I'm not going to lecture you on how to do community management and how to find the right publisher and things like that, because you're doing this for art and that's different. You know, that's perfectly fine. But if you want to be able to do this so you can quit your full-time job and start making games, you have to learn and understand and do all the things that need to be done to make your game successful as a business. And so that's what we try to do, you know, with all the work that we do on the indie game business side.
Okay. So, again,
look, I've been doing this 20 years. I still run a small company and there's days that I wonder the very same thing. So it's okay. Don't worry about it. You know, it's just it's part of the industry.
Okay, so thank you so much, Jay. You know, you've given the advice, you've suggested to people how they can maneuver the industry, especially when they're starting out. I think this was really, really useful. If there are any questions, if there are further comments, etc., please feel free to message. That would be great. Jay is very active on LinkedIn, at least I've seen you. So, you know, go ahead and keep posting your questions. And we're going to say bye now because I need to still speak to Jay. So good night and
Thanks,
good day.
everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It was fantastic. Thank you, Jay. Thanks so much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.